Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's right-hand man. He was born in the island of Nevis in the Caribbean. His parents were not married, so technically it was a bastard. He came to New York City and went to King's College, which is Columbia University today, and he called for the revolution against the British. During the Revolutionary War, as an adjunct officer, he would write out all the orders for Washington. In fact, he was so important and thought to be intuitive, he could actually write out orders without Washington's approval. But frankly, as a military man, he was getting bored of this. He wanted to fight the field. Basically, what he wanted was glory to cash in on his later political days. And he kept petitioning Washington, saying, I want to fight in the field. And Washington would say, no, you're too important. I need you here now. Finally, when he threatened to resign his command, that is when Washington came. He was involved in the very last major battlefield of the war up by Yorktown, where the Redcoats surrendered to the Revolutionary forces. And he was considered to be a major hero of that battle. Minor skirmishes happened for some time afterwards, but finally the British left the colonies. This is the last place they left, this island Manhattan, on evacuation day that I mentioned earlier. Now, George Washington was not exactly a Federalist, but he followed all the ideals of them. But in that same vein, Alexander Hamilton was a leading Federalist, and they were all about a strong central government. The opposing parties, led by Jefferson, were the Democratic Republicans, or referred to basically as the Republicans. They were all about states' rights and individual rights. And Hamilton agreed to disagree with most, but one man he had a running riff with. Now, during the George Washington's first administration, he held the post of Secretary of Treasury. And he's one of the few people that you will see on U.S. currency that was never a president. There he is, thusly, on a $10 bill. The only other one is Benjamin Franklin, a $100 note. And if you look on the reverse side, you see the Treasury building honoring him twice. While he was Secretary of Treasury, he brokered a deal moving the capital of the United States from New York City to Virginia. Now, he would have liked to have seen it stay here like a lot of people would have. But as Secretary of Treasury, he was much more concerned with the crippling war debt that was burdening our young nation. It was Thomas Jefferson who wanted to move the capital to the banks of Potomac in Virginia. And Hamilton was like, why would you want to move it to swampland? But then he thought again, and he thought, wait a minute. He wants to move it to the capital to Virginia, but I also want to pay off the war debt, and he's against that. And so he bumped into him out of George Washington's house, and they struck a deal. And Hamilton said, if you support my move in Congress to pay off the war debt, I'll support your move to move the capital to D.C. And the deal was done, it was struck. In the interim, the capital moved to Philadelphia in 1800, Virginia, of course, where Washington, D.C. today. Now, back before the days when we actually had Germans, in 1796, George Washington decided not to run for a third term. Basically, he was fed up with all the squabbling going on, and it was his vice president, John Adams, who decided to run for president. Adams being a Federalist and Hamilton being leading Federalist, supported him line in line. He ended up getting the nomination and winning the election in 1796. But his administration, from Hamilton's point of view, very milquetoast and mediocre as far as being a Federalist administration. So Hamilton supported another man for the election of 1800, a man named Pinckney on the Federalist side, and he wrote a scathing article about John Adams, and it was meant for private eyes only. And he really attacked him personally in a letter that was sent out to the congressional people, which was supposedly released to the general public, not intentionally by Hamilton's point, by a man named Aaron Burr. This really hurt Hamilton, because Pinckney did not get the nomination for president. He got it for vice president. Adams, the sitting president of the United States, got the nomination and not on the federal side. And now you have Hamilton bound by the sole man for the entire country. Think about that on a stature town. Now, the election of 1800 looked like this. Back then, we had fewer electoral votes than we have today. We had 137 altogether, and it was done differently. It was split twice. Here's how the election went. On the federal side, you had John Adams and Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. And on the Democratic Republican side, you had Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr running. Adams and Pinckney got 65 electoral votes. Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr got 73. But something happened that never happened before or after U.S. politics was concerned. It was basically a screw-up. The delegates who vote these electoral votes each had 2 votes to vote each. They were supposed to structure it such that Thomas Jefferson, the presidential candidate, would come on top, say, at 75 electoral votes, and Aaron Burr beneath at 71. Ended up being a dead heat tie, 73-73. So it had to go into the House of Representatives to determine who would be president. And at this point, although Aaron Burr was the vice presidential pick, he could taste the White House, and he wanted it. Hamilton thought that Jefferson was misguided, but he thought Aaron Burr to be completely out for himself, selfish, just downright dangerous. So he lobbied everybody could lobby in the House of Representatives. Lettering campaigns, conversations, whatever it took 36 ballots. But finally, after a census by both North Carolina and Delaware, Thomas Jefferson was president, Aaron Burr vice president of him. Aaron Burr resented this deeply of Hamilton. And a lot of competition ensued between these two men as well. For instance, Hamilton formed the very first bank in New York, the Bank of New York, which today is Bank of New York Mellon. And not to be outdone, Burr, in 1799, forms what's called the Manhattan Springwater Company. No intentions of keeping that. He wants to create a bank, so he parlays the funds in a sneaky transaction over to the Bank of Manhattan. Today, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company. About that same time, something came out in the papers about a party Hamilton attended about 3.5, 4 months earlier, in April of 1804. This is the article came out, which stated that he was thinking that Burr, who now wanted to run for governor of New York, was not a good candidate, and he made some derogatory remarks, but it did not go into the details in the paper. When Burr read this, he immediately confronted Hamilton and said, "Hey, what is it that you said about me at this party?" And Hamilton said, "I'm sorry, I can't recall. It's been 2.5, 3 months." And Burr shot right back and said, "Whatever it was, you retract it now." And Hamilton said, "I'm sorry, I cannot retract what I never recall." So it is. And he thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Burr got more and more steam. Angrier and angrier, the accusations flew. Finally, the venom had reached a boiling point. Men had their honor in those days, and Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel. And Hamilton, being a man of honor, accepted. He was actually no stranger to these affairs of honor. He'd been through 10 of them, but they'd all remained shotless and agreed to an apology or a handshake or something like that. Not so in this case. You should know something about the states of minds of these two individuals going into this duel. Burr was thought to be antagonistic and downright belligerent. Basically, he was in your face with attitude. On the flip side of the coin, Hamilton was thought to be bipolar and perhaps even suicidal for 3 reasons. First, that scathing article that released about John Adams brought his stature from here to here as leading Federalist. Second, Hamilton's son, Philip, was involved in a duel in 1801. His son was killed in that duel. He never got over it. Finally, third, he was a married man exposed before a toward affair. To make matters worse, he actually tried to explain the affair to the public at large in detail and fell horribly flat and said he'd do anything to save Burr. Dueling was outlawed in Manhattan. You could not duel in New York State for that fact. You had to cross over the Hudson River to New Jersey. Both men had seconds and assistants. The seconds being the post help. Flipped the coin, Hamilton second in the coin toss. He chose Weehawken Heights, popular area for dueling over in New Jersey. Along with that, Hamilton got to choose the weapons called the Walken pistols, known for their accuracy and interesting because of several reasons. First, these are the same pistols involved in the duel that Hamilton's son was killed in, and Hamilton chose these pistols. Second, they were involved in another duel between Burr and another man where butt was shot off a Burr shirt, close shave, right? Finally, the pistols themselves are interesting. This is an antiquated design that predates bullets. You have to tamp gunpowder into the barrel, take a little bitty muscle ball shot down it. It takes a lot of pressure to pull back the trigger and even more pressure to squeeze it. But these were state-of-the-art pistols. They had in them something called a hidden hairspring trigger design, which meant that they fired with very, very light finger pressure. And many people, because of that, thought that Hamilton's weapon misfired, but it's highly unlikely because Hamilton knew these pistols. So here it is, July 11th, 1804, the early morning hour. It's about 6 o'clock in the morning. Both men board rowboats in separate boats and row across the other side with their seconds and assistants. The seconds immediately take opposite ends and don't look at anything in the assistants, so to have something called plausible liability if ever brought in the courtroom. They also don't look at the weapons themselves. They're transported and seen in a separate bag. In this rate, the plausible liability can be continued as well. Hamilton chooses a slightly hybrid ground. He takes practice with his money, sighting down his sight several places to make sure everything is proper. Right away, Burr may be thinking, this guy's serious. Hamilton gets the first shot because he's the challenger. He raises his pistol in the air, aimed, he fired, hitting a tree branch about 12 feet beyond Burr's head, causing the branch to dead. Burr took immediate umbrage. He leveled his pistol, aimed, he fired at Hamilton, devil or left at him, striking one of his false ribs. Ricochet entered his cavity, striking his diaphragm in his liver, launching at his liver rate. He immediately, involuntarily dropped his pistol, and just as he was slipping into oblivion, he said, "This is a mortal wound," and he was out. Burr was aghast to actually Hamilton, and his second assistant quickly ushered him back to the boat under the cover of an umbrella, which is an incognito thing they did in those days. They went back to Manhattan, he had breakfast, and that was the end of that. Hamilton, on the flip side of the coin, was brought back to his boat in an unconscious state. when they got him there, they gave him something called hartshorn to fever urine spirits. It's like a smelling salt today. And because he woke up in a Jambalay state, he woke up and he said, "Careful of the open weapon. It's so cocked that it might do damage. I was shooting your pistol in the air." Back in those days, if you were challenged to a duel and you shot your pistol in the air, it was customary for the honor party to do likewise. And then the duel was over, the honor preserved. Not so in this case. Now, Hamilton knew that he was on death's door. And although he was not a terribly religious man, he wanted to take his final communion. And he had to lobby a lot of churches to do it, because they were mostly all against dueling. But finally, he found one. And that is Trinity Church. And the following day at 2 p.m., he promptly died. The following day, something came out huge in the papers. Hamilton had written something called a pre-duel pledge, and in that pledge he stated, "I am morally opposed to dueling. I therefore will blow my first shot in the air, and if God preserve me and goes to the second shot, I blow my second volley up in the air." Well, when Burr heard this, he scoffed and he said, "Contemptuous if true." But when everybody else read it, they thought, wait a minute, Hamilton blew his pistol up in the air and shot Hamilton dead. Burr is a murderous thug! It ruined him. He was vice president of the United States with aspirations to the presidency for sure. Gone. Also had his eye in the apple of New York, the governorship. Out like light. New Jersey's grand jury immediately indicted him for murder. But because the aspect of plausibility was cut loose, he went back to Washington with his tail between his legs to finish out his vice presidency there. When he was through there, his aim was mud, and you see in New York, up and down the eastern seaboard, this guy's political days went through. And he was a politician through and through. So he became a nomad. He went to Europe. Nobody wanted him there. He went out west. And while he was out west, because nobody wanted him in the East Coast, he supposedly was involved in a seditious act to acquire the entire Louisiana Purchase in a coup d'etat and take it from the United States, America's separate country. They immediately attempted to try and portray along with the rest of his co-conspirators, but because of lack of evidence, he managed to weasel out of it. For another 6 years, he was a nomad. He continued to. Finally, in 1812, he came back to America to practice law. That's when New York indicted him for murder, and it did go to trial. But because of the age evidence and the plausibility, he ended up in acquittal. Finally, September 14th, 1836, on the very last day of Burr's life, his wife divorced him. And the ultimate irony, it was Hamilton's young son, the young Alexander, who represented Burr's wife in the courtroom. And Burr never apologized.